Of the hundreds of cases I've covered, today's story contains one of the most disturbing crime scenes in American history. A content warning before we begin. While there won't be any graphic images shown, the details of what happened to 2 adults and 6 children in a small Iowa home are deeply unsettling, and so for that reason, viewer discretion is advised. But what makes this case truly haunting isn't just the brutality. It's that after 112 years, the killer was never caught. In 1912, the small town of Villisca, Iowa, was exactly what you picture when you think of rural America. With a population of just over 2,000 people, it was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where neighbors waved from their porches and children played freely in the streets. And at the heart of this community was the Moore family. Josiah B. Moore, or Joe as everyone called him, was 43 years old and one of the town's most successful businessmen. He owned and operated the Moore Implement Company, a John Deere dealership that had become one of the most prosperous businesses in the area. Joe was described as ruggedly handsome, confident, and well-liked by practically everyone he met. He was the kind of man who'd give you a firm handshake and remember your name the next time he saw you. His wife, Sarah, was 39, and she was the glue that held everything together. She kept their modest 2-story home immaculate, played piano at the Presbyterian church, and was deeply involved in community events. Their neighbors described her as warm, tidy, and devoted to her children. And those children, Herman, who was 11, Catherine, who was 10, Boyd, who was 7, and little Paul, who was just 5 years old, were bright, well-mannered kids who attended Sunday school every week without fail. The Moores weren't just wealthy. They were genuinely beloved. As one tour guide at the house would later put it, they were the kind of family every small town has. The ones everybody loves, everybody respects, and nobody has a problem with. On Sunday evening, June 9, 1912, the Moore family attended a special Children's Day program at the Presbyterian Church just a 5-minute walk from their home. Sarah had spent weeks coordinating the event, and that night, her children recited their pieces while proud parents looked on. It was exactly the kind of wholesome community gathering that defined small-town life in that era. Among the audience that evening were 2 sisters, Lena Gertrude Stillinger, who was 12, and her little sister, Ina May, who was 8. The Stillinger girls were friends of Catherine Moore, and they'd been given permission to spend the night at the Moore house after the program ended. It was a treat for the girls, a sleepover with their friend after an exciting church event. And so around 9:45 that night, after the last hymn had been sung and the final goodbyes exchanged, the Moore family and the 2 Stillinger sisters walked the few short blocks back to the white 2-story house on East 2nd Street. The children were tired but happy. The summer air was warm, and as they disappeared through the front door, none of them had any idea that within hours something unspeakable would happen inside those walls. The next morning, Monday, June 10th, at around 7 a.m., a neighbor named Mary Peckham noticed something unusual. The Moore house was completely still. There was no movement, no sound of the children playing, no sight of Joe heading off to his store. The family hadn't come outside to do their morning chores, and the chickens, which should have been fed hours earlier, were still locked in their coop. Mary knocked on the door. No answer. She tried again, calling out. Nothing. The doors were locked, and every curtain in the house was drawn shut, and so Mary Peckham just had a bad feeling about what was going on. She called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore, and he arrived within minutes. Ross pounded on the door, shouted his brother's name, but the house remained silent. Finally, using his own copy of the house key, he unlocked the front door and stepped inside. What he found in the small downstairs guest bedroom would haunt him for the rest of his life. There, lying motionless on the bed, were the Stillinger sisters. Their heads had been covered with a cloth, and their skulls had been completely caved in. Ross Moore staggered out of the house in shock and told Mary Peckham to call Hank Horton, the town's primary peace officer. When Horton arrived and conducted a full search of the home, the true horror became clear. Every single person in that house, all 8 of them, including 6 children, had been bludgeoned to death in their beds while they slept. Their faces had been covered with pieces of clothing, and leaning against the wall in the downstairs bedroom was the murder weapon, an axe that belonged to the Moore family, taken from their own coal shed. The crime scene that investigators documented that morning was unlike anything the small town had ever witnessed. It would turn out that the killer had started in the master bedroom upstairs, where Joe and Sarah Moore lay sleeping. Joe received more blows than any other victim, an estimated 30 strikes that left his face completely destroyed, his eyes gone. Sarah was killed with the same brutal efficiency, never waking to defend herself or scream for help. But that wasn't even the worst of this situation. After killing the parents, the murderer went into the adjacent bedroom where all 4 Moore children were sleeping. Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and little 5-year-old Paul were each struck in the head while they lay in their beds. The doctors who examined their bodies believed they never woke up, never knew what was happening. And then the killer descended the stairs to the parlor bedroom, where the Stillinger sisters were sleeping together in a small bed. This is where investigators found the only evidence that anyone had fought back. Lena, the older girl, had a defensive wound on her arm and a blood stain on her knee. Her nightgown had been pushed up, though doctors concluded she had not been sexually assaulted. Unlike the others, Lena may have awakened in that final moment and seen the face of her killer. Now, you need to remember that this was 1912. Forensic science was in its infancy. Fingerprinting was barely understood, and DNA analysis was decades away. And what happened next at the crime scene made everything worse. Within hours, hundreds of curious townspeople had trampled through the house, picking up objects, moving evidence, and contaminating the scene beyond repair. But despite all this, investigators did find some crucial details. 2 spent cigarettes were discovered in the attic, suggesting the killer had hidden up there for hours, patiently waiting until the family fell asleep. A gas lamp was found with its glass chimney removed and its wick turned down low, just enough light to see by without being spotted from outside. Every mirror in the house had been covered with cloth, a practice associated with death rituals and funerals. And there was something else. A slab of bacon was found lying on the floor near the bodies. A pail of bloody water suggested the killer had calmly washed their hands before leaving. Food was reportedly found sitting on the kitchen table. The murderer had locked the doors behind them using a key when they left around 5 a.m., disappearing into the early morning darkness. There would end up being multiple suspects over the years. Iowa State Senator Frank F. Jones was suspected because he had a bitter rivalry with Joe Moore, who had left Jones's company and taken a lucrative John Deere dealership with him. There were rumors that Joe had an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law and that Jones hired a hitman named William Mansfield to carry out the murders. But no concrete evidence ever emerged. Then there was the serial killer theory. It would turn out that a string of similar axe murders had occurred across the Midwest in 1911 and 1912. Whole families slaughtered in their beds, their faces covered, the murder weapon left at the scene. Some investigators believed a single killer, traveling by railroad, was responsible for all of them. But the suspect who came closest to conviction was someone who had been at that church service the night before the murders, a man who left town just hours before the bodies were discovered. His name was Reverend Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly, and he was, by all accounts, a deeply disturbed individual. Kelly was an English-born traveling minister who stood just 5 feet 2 inches tall, a tiny, nervous, bird-like man described by everyone who met him as peculiar. He had suffered a mental breakdown as an adolescent and was known to have peered through windows at women and repeatedly asked young girls to pose nude for him. On June 8, 1912, Kelly arrived in Villisca to assist with the Children's Day services, the very same program the Moore family attended. He sat in the back of the church that Sunday night, watching the children perform. And then, at 5:19 a.m. on Monday morning, hours before the bodies were discovered, Kelly boarded a westbound train and left town. And this was the moment when everything changed. According to other passengers, Kelly told them there were 8 dead souls back in Villisca, butchered in their beds while they slept. He said this before anyone in town had found the bodies, before anyone even knew there had been a crime. In the weeks that followed, Kelly became obsessed with the murders. He wrote long, rambling letters to investigators, police, and even the victims' families, offering theories and asking for details. When investigators wrote back requesting information only the killer would know, Kelly responded with chilling accuracy. In 1917, after hours of grueling interrogation, Kelly confessed. He told police that God had whispered to him to slay and slay utterly. He claimed he had killed all 8 people in that house. But when his trial began, Kelly recanted his confession, claiming it had been coerced. The first jury deadlocked 11-1 for acquittal. A second jury acquitted him outright. Many townspeople believed he was being framed by Senator Jones, who had the money and political power to deflect suspicion from himself. And with Kelly's acquittal, the legal pursuit of justice ended. No one has ever been convicted for the murders of Joe, Sarah, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul Moore, or for the deaths of Lena and Ina Stillinger. The funeral was held 2 days after the discovery in Villisca's town square. Thousands attended. National Guardsmen blocked the streets as the 8 caskets were carried to the cemetery in a procession 50 carriages long. The case spawned nearly a decade of investigations, grand jury hearings, and trials. It destroyed political careers, and it led to the creation of Iowa's State Bureau of Criminal Investigation, a direct response to the bungled crime scene. Today, the Moore House still stands on East 2nd Street in Villisca. It has been restored to its 1912 condition, and visitors can tour the home where 8 people were murdered in their beds. Some even stay overnight. The case remains officially unsolved, and whoever killed those 8 people, including 6 children under the age of 12, walked out of that house, locked the door behind them, and was never seen again.